Okay. So I actually just shot this video for my YouTube channel, but I figured I would share it here as well. And it's so weird because social media is such an interesting dance that depending on the algorithm of the platform that you're using, you have to use different video formats. Right. So if you post a video, this is interesting. I don't know if you know this, but if you post a video on Facebook, Facebook won't show it to as many people as if you go live. In other words, if the video that I just shot on creating a peak performance imprint, I'm going to be putting on my YouTube channel, which I would love for you to check out my YouTube channel, Peter Schwartz. You can go YouTube that. But if I just posted that video here, interestingly enough, Facebook would not share it with that many people. So I figured, because I think this is such an interesting topic, that I would do a live on it here. Sorry, my phone seems to think I'm asleep, and I'm not. So let's talk about imprints and let's talk about peak performance. And then what I would like for you to have from this video is a way for you to take moments of peak performance. So when you think about peak performance, what I'm talking about here is times when you were at your absolute best, right? So if you think about a performance context, this could be work, this could be an athletic thing. Powerful Scott King, welcome to the live, man. And so anytime where you needed to be in the zone or you were in the zone, right? One of those moments where you kind of had to just like dust your shoulders off, because everything was firing on all cylinders, right? And if you think about an imprint is an experience that changed you, right? A positive imprint is what we're looking for here. We're looking for a moment in time that changed the way perhaps you look at the world, right? So for me, an imprint would be learning about NLP, right? Because when I first started to learn NLP, what happened was I started to realize that you have influence over your beliefs and attitudes well beyond affirmations. It's not this kind of thing where you chant out loud. And somebody asked me one time, I was doing a belief change seminar for a group of business brokers. We were all sat around, and I was demonstrating to them, or I was telling them about how to change beliefs. And this guy asked me, is that the thing where you lie to yourself over and over again and then you believe the lie? And while you can technically sometimes brainwash yourself that way by saying, I'm gonna be successful, I'm gonna be successful. There's actually much more elegant ways of changing your belief system. That our beliefs are actually based on our actual sensory experience. And same thing with peak performance, same thing with imprints, that you have a subjective way of coding a peak performance experience. That if you stop now, and I would invite anybody watching this to actually do this with me now, think about a time when you had a peak experience, a peak performance experience, a moment of flow, a moment when you were just in the zone, right? I can remember one time when I was sparring, something came over me, right? Where for some reason, I saw an image in my mind of Muhammad Ali. And I saw Muhammad Ali's body in front of me about to spar with my partner. And I kind of just stepped into his body. And in that moment of embodying this other athlete, I kind of let go of my limitations and I stepped into this elevated sense of game. And all of a sudden, things were coming out of me that typically wouldn't have. So think about a time. And if you have one, go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know that you have a moment when you had flow, when you had being in the zone. I know Scott is a DJ as well as now he's a mindset coach, hypnotherapist as well. I've had moments group coaching where everybody in the call was in sync, breathing at the same time, and the elicitations were going really well. Think about a moment when you were at your absolute best, in the absolute zone, and then compare that to an ordinary performance. So if I think about that example of when I was sparring and I compare that to a normal sparring experience, and then you start to go back and forth between the two experiences, you'll notice that they're different, that there is a subjective difference between the way you code these experiences. And in NLP, we call these submodalities. And this is a fancy word for saying that we think in terms of mental imagery, we talk to ourselves, and we have feelings. It's really that simple. But if you pay attention to this, if you actually go inside and pay attention, you'll start to notice that there are striking differences between the way that you represent a peak performance experience and the way that you represent an ordinary one. There will be differences in the images, whether it's the location, if one is closer to you, further away, if one is brighter. For me, it's the peak performance one is a little bit higher, like that. And I think about regular sparring, it's like here. It's interesting. Your brain has to have a way of telling the difference between the two. And what starts to happen is you start to make these distinctions between peak performance and ordinary performance. And when you can do that, now you have a subjective way of triggering peak performance on command. Because then you can take the times, you can tell I'm a little excited and passionate about this stuff. You can take the times when you want to have peak performance and code it with that same subjective experience. Now, this is NLP 101. This is mapping across. But we can take this a little bit deeper. So this kind of presupposes, actually, some knowledge of NLP, right? So to do this pattern well, depending on how many people show up, depending on how many people participate, I was going to walk people through it on the live. But you have limited feedback and comments, unfortunately. That being said, this kind of presupposes your familiarity with the ability to do elicitation. So just out of curiosity, do you know how to elicit the differences? If you don't, holler. Let me know if you want some help. And assuming that you have that ability and you can do a mapping across, the next thing we want to start to discover are the submodalities of an imprint experience. So think about, Scott, I know you have an NLP background. Anybody else in here, if you have an NLP background and you're familiar with NLP, you can do this. So what you'll be doing, essentially, elicit the submodalities of a peak performance. Silly goose. Still thinks I'm asleep. Elicit the submodalities of peak performance, compare it to regular performance so that you can notice the difference between the two. Notice the key differences between those submodalities that make it peak performance. And then elicit the submodalities of a positive imprint, right? Something that changed your life forever in a positive way. And typically, those things are, when we elicit the submodalities of that, typically imprint experiences are bigger, bolder, more potent, more intense in some form or fashion. And so what we do then is we actually add to the submodalities of that peak performance experience, we add those imprint submodalities as well. So that peak performance, that flow state, also takes on the submodalities of the bigger, bolder, life-changing event. So your brain codes this as something that's going to change you. It's a very, very, very powerful exercise. And once you have that, you're going to do a decision destroyer or a reimprint where you go back in time and you come up through your timeline, revisiting past experiences while you hold those submodalities present. Now, I'm using a lot of jargon here, which I'm hesitant to do, and I blame Scott, frankly, because I saw his name and Scott knows what these words mean. I recognize that I have two audiences. One is very familiar with NLP, and one is either not familiar or vaguely familiar. So that being said, I was very heavy on the jargon, but the takeaway here, the key takeaway is that your nervous system, your unconscious, subjectively encodes your experiences in a specific way that you can actually learn to tap into that. And by figuring out and eliciting what we call submodalities in this space. Sylvia, hi, good morning. By eliciting and figuring out what those are, then you can tap into them and then learn to trigger them on purpose. But moreover than trigger them, and this is, I think, a very important distinction, you can automate them, which is so much more powerful, right? So if you think about, people say they want to be able to control their emotions. Okay, it's okay, right? Much more powerful to be able to automate peak performance. Imagine that, that moment when you were in the flow state, the absolute peak experience. What if that was the foundation? Are you listening? What if that was the foundation for all future performances? What if that becomes the new starting point? So that you start from there. And you can learn to do that. You can learn to automate high performance states so they show up for you. All right, happy Monday. For those of you who are not instantiated in the language, I apologize. If you have questions, reach out to me. I do love this stuff. Happy to do some demos. All right.